Vampire the Masquerade Coteries of New York is a visual novel developed and published by Draw Distance. It's based on the TTRPG Vampire the Masquerade, and it's part of the larger World of Darkness series. It came out in 2019 for Windows and in 2020 for pretty much all other platforms. There's a whole variety of visual novels using the World of Darkness as a setting, though these New York ones are probably some of my favourites. The World of Darkness is a series that holds a dear place in my heart. I've been playing and running VTM on and off for the last 6 years or so, after first coming across the series through VTM Bloodlines, the action RPG on Steam. I think it was actually the second game I bought on Steam, so it's a setting I'm going to dive deeper into. This video is actually a multi-parter, as a standalone expansion called Shadows of New York follows on from this game, and there'll be links to that at the end of this one. There's also a third visual novel coming out, but I actually don't know when that comes out. The player takes on the role of a fledgling vampire with a choice of clans and abilities, with the story covering your embrace, first few nights and struggles as a creature of the night, your involvement in the wider conspiracies that grip New York as a place. The game's mainly text-based, with player choices impacting the events of the story and the fates of various characters within. You've got several routes going through the game, with each run not containing enough days to access all the content, giving it a bit of replayability, though I did find that slightly annoying from a completionist point of view. I wanted to do everything in one run. The World of Darkness as a setting is a dark, gothic punk interpretation of the real world, where all manner of things that bump in the night exist in secrecy from humanity, and you've got things like vampires, werewolves, mages, even sort of mummies and demons and that sort of thing that you can all play as in their various tabletop forms. The setting's got quite a rich history, going all the way from sort of Abrahamic times up to modern day, with various different source books detailing the Dark Ages, Victorian times, and even modern day. Now, this game focuses on vampires, and vampires are inherently political creatures in this game, ruling from the shadows, influencing humanity, and clashing against other vampires with various ideological differences. If you look at something like the Blade trilogy, you can see this in pretty picture-perfect fashion, just from the other side of the coin. Skyscrapers might as well be castle ramparts, and the ruling kindred have very feudal titles, from princes to bishops to barons, depending on your specific sect of vampire. The vampires themselves aren't really a homogeneous mass, and they're split into clans and bloodlines, each fitting a rough stereotype and sharing distinct supernatural powers. Some of them operate incredibly differently to others. An example of this would be the 3 clans you can choose from in the beginning of this visual novel. Clan Ventru being a ruling caste who use mind control and corporate backstabbery to reap wealth and power. Clan Toreador tend to choose their candidates from the beautiful or the artistically inclined, with supernatural senses and speed to accent this. Clan Bruja have access to the same speed, but along that they have super strength, and then they tend to take their stock from, rebels, soapboxers, that sort of thing. All 3 can alter their presence to attract or scare humans, and that's probably the common link they've got. Now, when you throw in the various clans, their histories, and the characters with their own individual goals, then you lump in some vampire hunters and supernatural prophecy, you get quite a comprehensive setting that can be used to tell a variety of stories, from Patrick Star to Patrick Bateman. This specific game is set in New York in the modern day. The vampire numbers are low, and there's a very tentative peace between the Camarilla and the Anarchs, 2 opposing factions with different ideas of vampire politics. One wanting to rule in a more feudal fashion, and one who don't really like the elders telling everyone younger than them what to do. The game's writer actually used the New York by Night sourcebook as inspiration, which contains a slightly different picture of New York as a city, embroiled in a very loud, very bloody war, and involving a faction you don't really see in this game. The artistic direction of this game is very good, and I've used a few of the background scenes and the world map for TTRPG purposes myself as a GM. Everything looks very polished, and the characters are very distinct and memorable in terms of their appearances. The music as well helps to transform the game from what is essentially a choose-your-own-adventure book into something much larger than the sum of its parts. I quite like the oil painting design of the characters and the audio stingers, and I just thought it was very unique but a compelling aesthetic for a gothic style game. They're really quite clever with how they use different parts of the UI. It is a visual novel at the end of the day, so there's not too much to track, but certain things such as the amount of blood and how hungry your character is are displayed on the screen as like a vignette around the outside of the screen. Unlike the other games I review on this channel, where I tend to go deeper to the story and give almost sort of a retrospective, in this case I'm not going to dive too deep. After all, if I did, it would make this into more of a let's play than anything. Instead, I'm going to talk about what the game covers and how I felt about it all, so this video is actually quite spoiler free. Enjoy. The start of the game, you're nothing more than human, or kine as the vampire call them. They have their own language to speak about these terms in secret. Now, you've got a choice of 3 different characters, which we kind of touched on, which will result in either being a ventru, a toreador, or a bruja. In practice, you're either a passionate man, an artistic man, or a controlling businesswoman. And while all the introductions start differently, all the scenes end up with your death, your embrace into the new vampire life, and a meeting with Sheriff Kadir al-Azmai. You can think of the sheriff exactly as that, a chief lawman among the organised vampires of New York. See, the thing is, polite vampire society follow a few rules. They're called the traditions in this setting, and there's 6 of them. They tend to focus on the basics, don't reveal your vampire nature to the humans, don't kill anyone unless you give them permission, but the important one is progeny. You can only sire a vampire with the permission of your elders. In practice, this is, you seek the prince, you ask for permission, and then you can sire. Unfortunately, no one got permission to sire you, and so you and your creator are both essentially forfeit. You're dragged into Elysium, which is the forum in which vampires meet to discuss the finer things with their peers and the upper management. The Prince of NYC is a Helene Panhar. She sentences you to death. After all, the traditions were broken. However, a patron of the court, Sophie Langley, intervenes and takes you under her wing. She's got enough sway in the court to do this, and through the rest of Act 1, Sophie teaches you all the basics of your new life. What is a vampire, how do they hunt, who's who in the city, and even provides you with a car and an apartment to sleep in during the daytime. She essentially serves as your mentor in this. And story-wise, so far so good, and it's quite a common setup for a lot of the tabletop games I've been in. You'll turn into a vampire, and then a big influential kindred comes in to tell you what to do. I think it's a good introduction to vampire society, the big Masquerade, and it's made quite easy to digest for players who are new to the setting. Throughout the rest of the game, you start to build your own coterie, a group of vampires who basically form a D&D party. You're given a list of prospects, each with their own quest lines, and it's quite possible to fail these if you choose the wrong options. Missions vary wildly, from social manoeuvring to full-on text combat against hairy beasts and the SWAT-like Second Inquisition. When it comes to your potential coterie members, there's Agathon. He's a Tremere, and you can think of him as a blood mage. He didn't really stand out too much to me, though I fear I just didn't give him a fair whack. You've also got D'Angelo and Nosferatu. Now, their clan are cursed to be disfigured, and he's become a gumshoe running odd jobs for anyone who needs a detective. He's disgusting and entertaining in all the right ways, with lines such as, "Hey, you beat me by a pube," and "I need a drink from a tall, sweaty glass." He injects quite a lot of humour into the game. The third member is Hope. She's a Malkavian. They're cursed to be slightly crazy. Her derangements are shown throughout her questline, and one of the most unique and cool portrayals of her clan I've ever seen. She's a cool character with a great questline, and her first mission involves moderating her chat for a very Masquerade-breaching webcam show. It's one of the most memorable parts of the game for me. Tamika rounds off the group. She's a gangrel, and they're probably the most beast-like of the vampires. She's got the ability to rend flesh and bone, grow claws, talk to animals, that sort of thing. You assist her in dealing with vampire hunters, and pretty much all of her missions involve combat in some way, shape or form. She's actually quite a well-rounded character, despite being the combat character, and probably my third favourite. Each night you have a choice of multiple missions, but only time for 2 a night. This means you won't see everyone's questline resolve in one playthrough, though there's plenty to explore in the game. From a deranged vampire stalker who lets herself into your apartment, to a reporter who actually suspects Sophie's immortality, you're given a lot of choices and the game feels very open, and a lot of these missions you can deal with however you really want, according to a dialogue wheel. In this last act, you're introduced to, I'd say that section takes up sort of Act 2 of the game. In the final act, you're introduced to the Anarchs as a group of vampires. They believe in rebellion against the Camarille's control and restrictions. You also then get wound up into a wider conspiracy involving a lot of movers and shakers, and it neatly ties up any loose ends it's given you in the story. A recurring theme in vampire games is the elders manipulating the young, and this game shows it full force. It feels like a snippet from an actual tabletop game, and I feel like they capture the spirit of the setting very well. My only complaint is that I wish the game carried on a bit longer. I actually found the self-insert characters you can choose from to be a bit bland, and preferred the sequels method of giving you a fleshed out character to play with, their own emotional flaws and problems to overcome. The player characters in this installation just feel a bit hollow for my liking. Overall, I think it's a great adaptation for the VTM series. It's been documented from a development point of view. While adapting a tabletop game to a narrative-driven video game, the developers focused on what they considered to be the core values of the tabletop game: personal stories, interesting characters, and conflicting motivations. They focused on these rather than gameplay mechanics, and it presents the world of V5 VTM to new players in a realistic to play way. I'm sure a lot of people will play this and then move on to the tabletop RPG and, go from there. It makes it quite easy to understand a variety of concepts introduced, and as a game it plays quite well, with the graphics and design choices making it feel more than just a visual novel. The story's rather engaging, if a little bit short, and I found certain character quest lines to be a real highlight of this game. Overall, I'd give it a 7 out of 10, and I'll be looking at Shadows of New York next today to try and mix things up a bit, so that'll probably be quite a longer video as there's more I can touch on without just spoiling the whole story. See you in part 2, Smooth Brains.